You know when you're reading a geopolitical thriller and you think to yourself, nah, this is just way too crazy to be real? Well, today we're diving headfirst into a story where the line between one of those novels and the actual news has gotten, well, incredibly blurry. It's a story that starts with a disappearance in the middle of the night, one that could seriously shake up the global markets.
All right, so let's get right into it. The whole thing kicks off on December 23rd, a time when most of the world is distracted thinking about the holidays. But down in Venezuela, something was moving in the darkness, something that really wasn't supposed to. And according to one source, this was no accident. This was deliberate.
And that brings us to the core mystery here, this midnight disappearance. We're going to unpack how, in the dead of night, something incredibly valuable just poof, vanished from a country that's already in a pretty deep crisis.
This right here, this is the number at the absolute heart of the story, 847 tons. That was the official weight of what was labeled mining equipment, loaded onto 3 massive cargo planes in just 47 minutes. But as one source alleges, you just don't move mining equipment with that kind of speed and military-like precision, especially not in the dark.
But see, 847 tons isn't just some random number. It's the exact amount of refined silver that was supposed to be sitting in Venezuela's central bank vaults, their strategic reserve. After those planes took off, only 3 tons were left. The vaults, they were practically empty. So, all of this leads us to what's being called the grand heist theory. The story here is that this wasn't some simple equipment transfer. Not at all. It was a perfectly planned international heist, a really bold move in a much, much bigger game of resource warfare. I mean, just look at this timeline. It lays out a sequence of events that suggests a perfectly coordinated operation. The metal gets moved, the state TV goes dark, the mines suddenly shut down, an emergency is declared, and then, just 32 minutes later, someone makes a massive profit on the New York Exchange. The market doesn't just move like that on its own. It moves like that when somebody on the inside knows exactly what's coming. And the alleged scale of this whole thing, it was just staggering. Apparently, it wasn't just 3 planes, it was 11. The first 3 sent to Miami were just decoys. The real prize, almost 1,200 tons of stockpiled silver, was supposedly loaded onto Russian Antonovs heading for Moscow, while Chinese cargo planes handled another secret portion. This whole thing just screams state-level coordination. But here's the thing, this wasn't just about grabbing the metal and running. No, it was a financial heist too. This whole manufactured crisis supposedly allowed Venezuela to declare force majeure, which is basically a legal get-out-of-jail-free card. It let them tear up their contracts with Western companies, sell the silver through shell companies to Russia and China, and make billions in profit that's completely untraceable. The asset was basically laundered. Okay, but like any good thriller, right when you think you've got it all figured out, there's a plot twist. So now we're going to explore a totally different theory, because another perspective suggests that, well, as dramatic as the silver story is, we might be looking at the wrong resource entirely. What if this entire spectacular event was actually just a distraction? A big, flashy sideshow designed to pull our attention away from a much larger geopolitical fight, one that's being fought not over precious metals, but over black gold. So let's just put these 2 theories side by side. On one hand, you've got this covert Russian and Chinese plot to corner the silver market and maybe even attack the dollar. But on the other hand, you have a U.S. power play to control Venezuela's oil reserves, which are the largest in the world, by the way, and keep that cheap energy away from China. And of course, just as these 2 massive narratives are colliding, the internet does what it always does. It throws gasoline on the fire. The supposed memo from Morgan Stanley started flying around online trading groups, just fueling the panic. But this is where reality starts to push back against the fiction. It is so crucial to point out that there has been 0 evidence this memo ever existed. The general thinking now, it was a fake, probably cooked up by an AI, designed specifically to play on people's fear and manipulate the market. So, look, whether the Venezuela story is 100% fact or a piece of fiction, it shines a massive spotlight on a verifiable truth. All of this is playing out on the stage of a global silver market that is under extreme, measurable pressure. This part isn't speculation. This is just the data. Okay, first, let's just talk about supply. The numbers here are pretty darn clear. Global silver production actually peaked way back in 2016. Ever since then, it's been in a steady decline. We are simply pulling less silver out of the ground than we used to, and all the easy-to-get stuff, it's gone.
All right, so that's supply. Now let's flip over to the other side of the coin, demand. And demand isn't just growing, it is absolutely exploding. Green energy, high tech, they're just eating up silver at a rate we've never seen before. Solar panels alone now use 22% of all mined silver, and an electric car uses 10 times more than a regular gas-powered.
So what happens when you have supply that's shrinking and demand that's just skyrocketing? Well, you get a deficit, a big one. The market is now looking at a structural deficit of about 300 million ounces every single year. The world is consuming way, way more silver than it can actually produce. And listen, this isn't some problem for 10 years down the road. This is a right now problem. We have verified reports showing big banks like JP Morgan making huge moves, pulling millions of physical ounces of silver out of their competitors' vaults. This is a bank-on-bank squeeze for physical metal, and it's happening as we speak.
So, why does any of this matter to you? A wild story out of Venezuela, some market data, oil politics, what's the big deal? Well, because whether the weapon is silver or oil, these kinds of events signal a fundamental change in how the world actually works.
What we're seeing is the dawn of what experts are calling resource nationalism. And what that really means is countries are starting to treat these raw materials, the stuff that builds our phones and powers our cars, not as goods to be bought and sold freely, but as strategic weapons to be hoarded and controlled. The era of the free market for these things might be ending. This leaves us with a few really critical takeaways. We could be looking at the first shots of a coordinated attack on the dollar, using resource control as the weapon. Or we could be walking into a new kind of Cold War, fought over energy. Either way, major companies are facing supply chain chaos, and we are almost certainly going to see a growing lack of trust in currencies that aren't backed by anything real. And all of this leaves us with one final, and I think really critical question. In a world with AI-generated rumors, state-sponsored stories, and covert ops, the battle for physical resources is also a battle to control what's real. When fiction and reality collide like this, figuring out which is which might just be the most valuable commodity of all.